Hey, Northern Hills Church family, this is Pastor Nate here bringing us our Friday Daily Devotional. I hope you're doing well. Fridays going forward, we're going to be doing Friday Daily Devotionals in light of church history, and I'm so excited that the elders have asked me to do this. I love church history. There's so much in church history for us to learn and know, and so our goal today is just to take a snapshot, a very small moment in the life of a man who God used for his glory and for his purpose that's still having an impact on a nation today. We're going to look at the life of Adoniram and Judson and a key moment that happened in his life. At 16 years old, Adoniram goes off to the University of Brown, gets an education in grammar and mathematics, then goes off to the Andover Theological Seminary, gets an amazing education in theology, and then goes and finds his first wife, Ann. They get married, and they feel called clearly by God to go and share the gospel amongst the Burmese people. And man, I would love for you to know more about that story. Just the story of the way that Judson pursued his first wife is such an amazing story, but that's not what we're going to focus on today. We're going to focus in on a key moment in his life in his midway through ministry. And so as he gets to Burma, they begin to learn language, develop relationships, not only with locals, but they begin to develop relationships with national leaders and gain the respect and love of many in Burma. But as they developed an understanding of what was needed, they began to realize that one of the most important things that was needed in Burma was the Bible being translated in the Burmese language. And so this was a perfect thing for him. He was a grammar major. He was well crafted and skilled in knowing how to translate the Bible from Hebrew and in Greek into a language. And so God had perfectly crafted and designed a man to go exactly at the time needed in history to go and fulfill his purposes. And so as Judson began to do that work and that labor from 1812 onward, we see just this amazing love and development in Judson's ministry. But in 1824, a war breaks out between the nation of England and the nation of Burma over territory, and it's known as the Anglo-Burmese War. And that war ultimately had some devastating effects on not only the nation of Burma, but even many people who lived in the Burmese country at the time, due to the fact that the king felt threatened and afraid and was trying to do the best to protect his people. And so ultimately, he issues a decree that all foreign men would be arrested as potential spies. And so this included Judson. And so Judson, in the middle of the night, was taken from his home, put into a prison, where he was left to kind of fend for himself. His young wife, Anne, would go and care for him, provide him food as needed, and give him water, and meet physical and emotional needs. And during this time, Judson had already begun work on the New Testament, and he was devastated at what this might ultimately mean for the work that he had been investing. And so he asked his wife to figure out a way to get him his scrolls so he can continue, or at least protect, the work that he had put into translating the Bible into the Burmese language. And so she conceived this idea of putting the scrolls that he had into a pillow so that he could have them with him while he was in prison. And this prison, unfortunately, was a devastating prison. Every day at 3 o'clock, they would kill another man as a potential spy, and God, in his infinite plan and purpose, preserved the life of Judson. And so Judson stayed in prison for a significant period of time. His wife gave birth to their firstborn child during this time. His wife ultimately would continue to meet those needs, and another general in a distant village decided that he wanted those spies transferred from where they were at to where he was at, and that included Judson. And so Judson one day was woken by these prison guards. They came and stripped him of their clothes and of their shoes and of anything that they had with them, and threw it out into a trash heap to be burned. And unfortunately, that included the pillow that held the documents of the New Testament translation that Judson had been working on. And so Judson was marched off to another village miles away, barefooted and beaten, to be held in front of this other general. And this general ultimately was bringing these men to him to ultimately kill. And so Judson was just devastated over the reality that the work that he had labored in would be for naught. And so Anne, hearing the news of her husband being transferred to another prison, went off to go be in that village to meet the needs of her husband there while taking a newborn baby with her. And so this is over the course of about 12 months. And so Judson ends up staying in that prison for a significant period of time. Things are not going well. Anne gets very sick. She gets dysentery. Judson pleads with the general and the guards to let him go so that he can go and care for his wife and children or child. And ultimately, one of the guards allows Judson to leave during the day to take his infant child to go into the village to find a woman who was breastfeeding in order to provide milk for the baby for that day, and then take the baby back to Anne, who was sick in her fragile state, and then go back to prison. And an amazing story in itself. But ultimately, the war kind of is easing up, and the general releases these men who he had brought to kill to go back home. And so over the course of what was 12 months turned into 17 months, and Judson goes back home with Anne, and he begins to just process, what will it be for me to begin to work on this translation now that I'm out of prison. And so as he's beginning to process all of this and begin to work through the stress of what it was to be in prison for 17 months, they received a knock at the door, and it was the cook that used to work for Judson back before he was arrested. And he was holding something in his hand. And what he didn't realize at the time was that the cook was holding the pillow that Anne had given to Judson while he was in prison to use as a pillow, but also to have the New Testament with him. The cook had found it out in the trash heap after the prison guards had taken the prisoners off to the other village, and thought that it was a very odd pillow, but yet he took it home and he went to clean it, and as he was cleaning it, he discovered the scrolls inside there and realized that these were the scrolls that Judson had been working on. And so he preserved it and kept it so that when Judson was released, he would give it back to him. And so Judson thought he was going to have to start over, but now God had preserved his word for the Burmese people so that they could have the Bible in their own language. And he used a random, obscure man that nobody really knows the name of, other than if you read the biography of Judson, you would find his name there. But this humble little cook preserved God's word so that Judson can continue finishing the work that he had done in the New Testament to begin to do in the Old Testament, so that the Burmese Bible would be complete. And that's exactly what happened. Judson ultimately was able to finish the translation of the New Testament and the Old Testament. Unfortunately, his wife Anne passed away a couple of years later, and then 6 months later, his daughter had passed away, and ultimately led to a really hard time in Judson's life. And there's so much more that we can learn from Judson, but unfortunately, I don't want to spend hours doing that today. But I would encourage you this. Anne and Adoniram had a passage that they lived by as they went to the nation of Burma. And it was Psalm 115:1, and it says this: "Not to us, O Lord, not to us, but to your name give glory, for the sake of your steadfast love and your faithfulness." Church, Judson and his wife understood this, that their lives were to be a sacrifice for the glory of God. And so, namely for one of his biographies, somebody titled The Biography of Judson's Life, Spent for God. And that's exactly what they did with their lives. They spent it for God. And church, when I look at their lives, I pray and I'm challenged by, what does it mean to be spent for the glory of God, that we might live in such a way that brings glory and honor to the God that we love and we've been redeemed by. So church, may you be blessed this morning. May you think and reflect on what it would look like for you to use your life as a sacrifice for God's glory here on earth, so people who are far from God might know God and walk closer to God the rest of their days. Church, love you. Hope you've been blessed. See you soon.